Welcome to Archaeology Books for Fun, a podcast where we talk about books that are about archaeology, but anyone can enjoy. Except not today, because today we're going to talk about Indiana Jones, like probably every other archaeologist out there.
I have seen a lot of Facebook posts about this.
Yep, it's a big thing right now. And we thought, while this will definitely not become our norm, how often do you get a chance to talk about Indiana Jones, a new Indiana Jones movie specifically? Warning right up front is we're not going to try and avoid spoilers. This is spoiler territory, so if you're waiting to see the movie, go see the movie and then come on back and give us a listen. So I figured we should probably start with talking about Indiana Jones a little bit in general. You've probably heard us reference Indiana Jones and kind of how we feel about it. But kind of, Barbara, what's your relationship with Indiana Jones?
Well, like a lot of archaeologists, it was one of the first times, especially as a young child, I had ever really been exposed to archaeology, right? And obviously, even as a kid, you know, it's fake. It's all kind of fantasy or whatever. But I have an appreciation for the movies as entertainment. And as I have grown up and actually been educated in archaeology, I realize what a horrible archaeologist he is. However, I see the value in the movies for getting people interested in archaeology.
Sure. Yeah. And it's important to note that for the time when he's portrayed, for most of the movies, he's actually kind of on par with what was going on at the time. We've talked about our first book we covered was The Dig. That actually is kind of when Indiana Jones was supposed to be most active according to these movies. And we talked about how kind of that was a little bit exceptional as far as how that was handled.
Yeah, that's true.
However, he is not a good representation of archaeology, especially as it is today, and kind of what our overall goals are. But like you, I very much enjoy the movie despite its flaws, although its flaws, we ought to say too, do go beyond just archaeology. And there are some issues in how other cultures are portrayed in Indiana Jones, in probably all of them, although I'm not so sure this last one's as bad as some of them.
It's not as blatant, but I would argue that there is still some stereotypes in there.
I just wasn't thinking about that till just now. So we saw the movie just yesterday, so it's still pretty fresh for us, by the way. So we're kind of working through some of this as we go. We haven't sat down and taken deep analysis and watched it and taken notes.
And to be fair, the creators of the franchise never claim to make it an accurate portrayal of archaeology. That's not the point. The point is adventure. It's the adventures of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're talking about comes from its origins too. It starts with kind of like that pulp adventure stuff in the era, and so Indiana Jones is derived from that, and it has some leftovers from that for how it's presented, and so both some good and maybe some less helpful ways.
And I really enjoyed this last movie. I know you and I were both worried because the Crystal Skull was a big old flop for a number of reasons. And so I was kind of worried about this latest one, The Dial of Destiny, just because I feel like a lot of franchise, once they flop or once they have one that does flop, the whole franchise just goes down the drain. But I feel like they redeemed themselves.
Mm-hmm. No, this was a solid Indiana Jones movie. It was very enjoyable. It was a reasonable place for the series to stop even, I think. And I kind of almost hope they do.
In theory, they're supposed to, although I did notice at the end, at the end of every Indiana Jones movie, there's like the hat. And then they did the same thing with this at the end.
Well, it was literally hung up.
Yeah.
And then he reached out and grabbed it. So
right. So, but I guess you could also take that to mean like Indiana Jones will live on even if that's the last of the series.
Or that he's found that part of himself again, kind of, because that's kind of the narrative, is that he's lost so much and he's lost a bit of that drive and I guess that spark, you could almost say, and then he's found that again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a very enjoyable way of finishing that up, I thought.
Yeah. Better than Aliens. No aliens.
No aliens. That was the worst decision yeah.
Yeah, there
are other bad decisions in that movie.
If you've seen Crystal Skull and you know about the aliens, especially if you're an archaeologist, you probably I was mad. I was like, how could they do that? They ruined the entire franchise. And then just to fall into that old aliens trope annoyed me.
Well, and I didn't fully appreciate when that movie came out just how problematic that portrayal was too.
Yeah.
And we've alluded on that in some other ones, but just so you're all aware that there is a strong tendency amongst Western cultures to try and explain away other cultures' accomplishments as couldn't be these people that did it. In the past, it was things like this must have been the lost city of Atlantis, or this must have been the lost tribe of Israel. And as time has passed on, it has become more and more like aliens must have done it, because no way these primitive people could have done it. I'm using air quotes there.
Yeah, it's more likely that beings from out of space did it than the culture that actually resided in that
Right.
area.
Which is just such a
War.
huge insult to the people who,
Yeah.
the culture that actually did it. So that's kind of why. And then it was also a South American culture, you know, again, and just it really didn't sit well for any of us.
Yeah. But this one involves time travel. And I got a little worried. I will admit that I got a little worried when they were going through the fissure and everything was happening and the time travel thing kind of got me. And I was like, oh my God, not again.
Yeah.
But then they redeemed themselves. And I actually kind of like the way it came about, because Helena was like, you know, Indy wanted to stay. And Helena was like, you can't. You're going to alter history.
And die.
But I like that it wasn't just about like Indiana Jones dying potentially. It was about him altering history, which in fact, like you can see in the preceding scenes that they did kind of influence history, but she didn't want them to mess it up more.
Yeah, but history they were supposed to mess up history.
Right, yeah.
In that case.
Yeah. So it was really cool the way it was done. I liked it.
Pretty well, yeah. Though I have a question for you, Barbara. Would you want to stay?
Heck no.
Heck no.
I always, because sometimes people, I'll be at like a Civil War reenactment and people will say, oh yeah, I feel like I was born in the wrong time period. I'm like, well, then you have not really studied that time period, because I can guarantee you wouldn't want to live in that time period.
I wouldn't hate visiting in theory.
Right.
But staying long term, no way.
No.
I feel like almost anyone who thinks that, like you said, hasn't done enough research on what it was like to live
They
in that time
usually
period.
have fallen into like the romanticized version, especially like with the Civil War era. People are like, they've watched Gone with the Wind, you know? But I mean, especially as a woman, heck no, I wouldn't want to live in any time except the present, really.
Right.
Like, I like being able to own property and have my own bank account.
And air conditioning and penicillin.
Penicillin's pretty nice, yeah.
Yeah, and anesthetic. All these things are just great. We don't have to literally poison ourselves if we get syphilis anymore to try and with mercury. That was a thing.
Vaccines, pretty awesome. But I didn't like, so the one thing I really liked about this movie is they used a lot of, I don't know if you would call them like Easter eggs, but a lot of like the little things that make Indiana Jones as far as
Kind
the
of
series
callbacks, but it wasn't like, most of them weren't super overt.
Right.
Like it was its own, a different take on those things that make Indiana Jones.
Yeah. I like how, you know, in other ones they had, Short Round, the little boy, and they had a little boy Teddy in this one, but it wasn't the same little boy, you know. And my favorite one was when Marion at the end came back and he was like, oh, I hurt everywhere. And she's like, I know what you mean. And then he was like, where don't you hurt? And she like pointed at her elbow, and that was probably
played out that scene from the first movie.
Yeah. I was like, that is so cute.
Yeah.
Like, that was probably my favorite one, but the eels were a good one, because I was like waiting for the snakes. I was like, when are the snakes coming? There has to be snakes.
And there was the gross out scene that you always get with the bugs.
Yes, yeah.
Right? And I thought this was funny because there's a bit where they get through it and he's got a spider crawling over the brim of his hat. And I've literally had that happen to me.
Well, I like the sound the spider made too.
Yeah, it almost squeaked when they knocked it off. Yeah.
But of course there was the "It belongs in a museum" quote.
They said it a lot.
Yeah,
too.
they said it a lot. Like, that one may have been overdone, but also I kind of appreciate it because I felt like in this one, they realized that, oh gosh, there's a lot of issues with how Indiana Jones is a bad archaeologist. Like, you can go on any archaeology group on Facebook or something and you'll see like Indiana Jones memes about how he was a bad archaeologist. And so I feel like maybe they were trying to kind of point that out in a way, because there in this one there was kind of the battle between like morality, like, you know, Helena was trying to sell the stuff on the black market and he was like, it belongs in a museum, which is very ironic coming from Indy, who
right. He was doing it for profit.
Yeah.
And
then
fame,
in a scene before that, he like pushed over the shelves of all the collections at the university.
Yeah, to be fair, I guess, although that made me cringe, if guys were wielding guns at me,
right,
and that was my option, yeah, I think I might, because it'll still be there. It's just broken now.
But I also thought it was great. Well, but then like Helena, who, you know, was the one selling the stuff on the black market, she was like, I don't need a lesson in morality from an old grave robber. And I'm like, so they kind of clap back to that as well.
One of my favorite scenes in Crystal Skull, actually, one of the ones I really liked, was there's a scene where he and his son are in a tomb and they find a mummy, and Indy kind of grabs the dagger from the mummy and starts putting it in his pocket, and the Shia LaBeouf's character just kind of looks at him and he's like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I appreciated that call out especially.
Well, and like, so another thing I liked, because it was kind of like it was like kind of a send off of the next generation, because the reason Helena was looking for the Antikythera, right? Am I saying that right?
I think so.
The dial of destiny, as it were,
Right.
was because her father was super obsessed with it. Well, why did Indy get into archaeology? Because his father was super obsessed with like the Holy Grail.
Right.
And stuff.
That was the whole third movie, kind of, or part of the third movie.
Yeah. So I feel like they also
cycled that in, but in a subtle enough way. Like,
right.
They didn't ever draw a direct line.
Right.
They just said it and left it to us kind of figure out.
I thought it was weird because at the beginning, the Lance of Longinus was like the focal point, and I was like, wait, what's going on? And then it changed, because, you know, with a lot of Indiana Joneses, it's always like a religious artifact, or quite often a religious artifact.
Except for one time. Well, 2 times, I guess.
Yeah. But so I was like, wait, it's called a Dial of Destiny, and I'm like, I wonder what's happening here. And then like they're like, oh, it's a fake, and then it just kind of.
Although I like, and I know there are archaeologists that can do this with certain materials where they're very, very specialized in, but he's going down the train, he's like, fake, 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 fake. And you can just tell by looking at them, by glancing, that they're all fakes.
Also, one thing that struck me as odd, and I don't know enough about this, but I know the Nazis plundered, but mainly it was, from my understanding, it was mainly like belongings of like the people who, like the Jews, right? Like,
or the countries that conquered, I think. Yeah.
But there was like a ton of Egyptian artifacts on that train.
The whole war in Egypt or in North Africa.
Yeah, but would the Nazis have, I don't know. I've never heard of there being like Egyptian gold in any of those Nazi like.
Yeah, I don't know for sure.
But if anybody knows, well, let us know.
I found it a little interesting that so Nazis are bad, but one of the ways the Nazis were portrayed as bad is because they're taking other people's things. And you've heard us talk about just recently how there's actually a lot of repatriation news where we are sometimes finally returning things, and this is going on in Europe and in the US, that have been taken illegally or through conquest hundreds of years ago sometimes. And some, in many places, are still refusing to do that.
Another weird thing. So the Dial of Destiny was created by Archimedes, and it is a real thing. The artifact has been found. But they think it was just like an early like computing device, like a math device, not magical powers. But after the Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones is saying that, you know, everybody thinks that this dial has magical powers to go through time, da 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 da. And he's like, it doesn't have magical powers. And I'm like, but we just had aliens. Like, it was just kind of funny to me. Like, they would go from aliens to this is just an artifact.
The way he phrased it was, I don't believe in magic, but I've seen things I can't explain, right?
That's true. That's true.
And that seemed to be a callback to every movie, basically, because that happened in all of them. Is like, this doesn't, So I thought that was okay handled. He was reluctant to say it because, you know, he's seen thousands of other artifacts that didn't have apparent mystical powers.
And there were several quotes in there about, like, theory and science. I can't remember the one quote about theory, but I was like,
something about
it can't be 100% in theory only. You have to prove it through science or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a good quote, because somebody was like, you're only 99% sure. And he's like, I can't be 100% because it's theory only. And I was like, all right. I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, although they were using theory in the kind of the non-scientific way there too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. But
So-
I felt like it was a good try.
Yeah.
I give him like an A- for effort.
A little bit better portrayal of science for sure there.
And I like, oh my gosh, but can we talk about the scuba diving scene?
Your favorite, yeah. The most accurate part of the movie.
Oh, I love how he's like, I have Antonio Banderas is they don't say for certain that he's a sponge diver, but he's a diver. He has a boat and they're on the boat with him. And he has a full fire way to not get bent.
Most of the time.
And
What is getting bent?
what happens is nitrogen in your blood, when you dive, you have to come up really slowly and descend really slowly to give time for the nitrogen to kind of move through your body. Otherwise, you end up with nitrogen bubbles that are too big and can cause
Stroke, basically?
they can cause pain in your limbs and joints and things like that. And yes, it can be deadly. But so like I said, you have to descend slowly and ascend slowly. And anybody who's a scuba diver, that's like the first thing you learn. And he's like, yeah, my full fire way to not get bent is to go down really, really quick, stay for 3 minutes, and then pop back up really, really quick. And he calls it like bouncing or something like that. And I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, they go down really, really fast. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, goodness. And then when the one guy, like, actually, I think it's Helena, like she pops up, she like fully inflates her thing and just speeds to the surface. And I'm just like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm like, they'd all be dead.
All
be dead.
Yeah.
Then the horse scene is also ridiculous, but I loved it.
Yeah, that's earlier in the movie.
Yeah. That was another scene. That was probably, I'm not going to lie, I'm a horsey girl. That was probably my favorite scene. And Harrison Ford is actually an equestrian. He does ride, and he's been seen in other movies and pretty much every Indiana Jones movie riding. But this scene takes the cake, man. It was awesome. He is riding through a subway. He's going faster than trains on his horse. I mean, horses are fast, but come on.
He's racing the train to the exit and
then jumping up on the platform on the horse. Cool as can be, but yeah, completely unrealistic. But it doesn't matter because it's
the one-liner was good. Subway's faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how he's like, it's not his horse. He stole it from a police officer. And he's running through and doing all this stuff. And then when he's done with the horse, he hands it off to some random guy on the platform and says, hold my horse.
Yeah.
And gets into the train.
Yeah.
I'm just like, that's amazing. There's a lot of good one-liners in this.
It hit the notes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. But yeah, as far as archaeology is concerned, again, horrible archaeology. And really, honestly, there's not a ton of actual archaeology in this one. It's more about
exploring some things.
Yeah.
So one thing I appreciated was, they always give him a good enough reason, but they tended to be less destructive of the sites this time than some other ones. I'm thinking of when they find the Tomb of the Lost Knight or something in The Last Crusade, and the bad guys light the oil on fire and they just tip him over.
Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah.
But so if you're just watching it, you see it looks like they're being generally pretty respectful of the sites. But I want to point out too, like every little thing matters. For example, they find the tomb of Archimedes and they pull back the cloth that's covering his skeleton. Even that cloth is incredibly valuable. And I use the wrong word there, incredibly important.
Yeah.
Because that cloth, it's so rare to find cloth. How it was woven and I mean, I'm betting if they'd actually tested it, would have turned out to be parachute cloth.
Right.
The way that was kind of playing out there.
Yeah.
But of course they didn't have time to test it, so it's always the urgency kind of justifies some of that, or lets me kind of like, okay, fine a bit, like tipping over the shelves,
Yeah.
But it still hurts.
But yeah, it's so action packed. Obviously, they didn't have time to test the fabric, Tristan.
Right, and develop a hypothesis to test it.
But I did love the action one. I kind of had like a mental checklist of like all the Indiana Jones things I wanted to see. The motorcycle chase, you know, the horseback riding, one-liners, it belongs in a museum. Nazi punching, of
Nazi
course.
punching was great.
And I love how he like through the train, he's like, too many Nazis or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's really good. I think as far as Indiana Jones could, as far as the franchise, they did a pretty good job of addressing some of the concerns, like in an entertaining way, but some of the concerns that people may have had about archaeology. Obviously, that's not what Indiana Jones is about, right? But they still, I think, made an effort to kind of talk about like the morality involved in their typical Indiana Jones way. But at least they tried to address it.
A very superficial way still, I would say, but it was there.
But, and I mean, like Indiana Jones it's not archaeology.
You're not going to have a detailed, it's not that kind of thing where you sit down and have a chat about where the moral lines are and stuff,
right.
you know. So I'm
but
not
they still kind of tried to address it, and I appreciate that.
Right.
I think it was, I mean, they didn't even have to really try. And, you know, that's not what that movie is about or that franchise. It's about entertainment value.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very entertaining.
Yeah.
And we didn't see it as soon as it came out. And so I was kind of paying attention. I know, obviously, I have a lot of friends on Facebook and social media that are archaeologists. And so I was kind of looking for, like, not reviews, but what my archaeology friends said about it. And everybody enjoyed it. So it seems to be archaeologist approved. But I mean, I know a lot of us, that was our first exposure to archaeology, and we all kind of have a soft place for Indy in our heart, even though he is a horrible archaeologist.
Yeah, for me, for sure. I didn't even want to be an archaeologist because of Indiana Jones. That didn't change my mind on my plans at all at the time. But now I look back, it definitely was my first real exposure to it.
Yeah. And I love, so in this one, Indiana Jones is retiring from working at, I think it's like Howard University or something. He's been working there 10 years. He's a professor. And this all takes place on the day that they're having a parade for the moon landing. And apparently he still held class, which I thought accurate.
Yeah.
And the students are just like so bored out of their gourd. And you can even tell, like, he's kind of lost his passion for it. He's kind of going through the motions. He's trying to get the students on board and excited, but he's also like, whatever.
At least to start. And then he kind of gets a little fired up when he starts talking about the myth and the legend.
Yeah.
He kind of gets a little more animated.
And he does talk about, like, how do we know this? Through archaeology, which I was like, awesome.
The classroom seems to have always been the best archaeology, frankly.
Yeah.
He actually has some good bits of actual archaeology in the classroom. He just doesn't practice them as the character.
But it's funny because I think it was yesterday on social media, because I guess one of the criticisms was, oh man, because he's like 70 in this scene. Is like 1969 and he's 70 years old now and he's retiring, and everybody on social media is like, retiring at 70, that's a little old. That was like one of their harshest criticisms. And I've seen like people who work in academia going, that was probably the most accurate thing, is a 70-year-old professor who finally is about to retire.
Yeah.
You know? And I was like, ouch, but yes.
Yes. No, so I think that wraps up all the highlights for us. You can tell we enjoyed it. Barbara, how does your Indiana Jones favorite list rank right now?
Honestly, and this might just be because I just saw this movie, but I really like this one the best, I think.
Out of all of them?
Yeah.
Really?
I think so. And I think because it incorporates all of the little Indiana Jones things in one, and I also like and I know all of them have had a little bit of like the generational thing. He's always had his son or his dad or something like that. But I like that it was his goddaughter rather than like somebody who's directly related to him. And, there's a couple of scenes where he's like, why do you want to go after this thing that essentially caused your dad so much pain? And she just looks at him and she's like, wouldn't you?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, Indy.
Didn't you?
You know, so little things like that I thought added kind of, and maybe it's because I've been working in archaeology for so long now, but it's like, oh yeah, there's certain things that as you age, right, you kind of either get jaded or you forget what you were passionate about and what got you into it and things like that. And I think it did a really good job. And this is true not of just archaeology, but I mean, as we all age, there's something that in our lives that kind of changes like that. And so I like the age factor, you know, it was just this guy kind of struggling with getting older, but also he was also kind of accepting that he was older sometimes. So I like, it seemed to be more dynamic than a lot of them, a lot more personal strife. And I kind of like that.
So as far as the whole list goes, what would your whole list be then? So this may be first, although new factor could be a factor.
Yeah. Ooh. Obviously, Crystal Skull is way at the bottom.
Yeah.
Can we just like knock that one off the list? I don't know if I can even put them in order. What would your order be, or what was your favorite?
Well, my favorites, and the first two are, I'm sure there's a big hunk of nostalgia in them, but Raiders of the Lost Ark is still my favorite. As far as when I think of iconic Indiana Jones scenes, most of the time I'm picturing that movie.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
And then The Last Crusade. I thought that one was my favorite, but then like I said, when I picture that one, I don't have as many iconic scenes as like the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
So I feel like Raiders would probably come under this one for me.
Yeah.
But
I enjoyed them both a lot. And then this one would be my third now. I know there are those out there who will be really upset with me for this, but I do not really care for Temple of Doom. So that would be my number 4, and then Crystal Skull would be number 6.
See, I would probably not upset with you, Tristan. But the Temple of Doom to me was just, I was in it for the action. I really liked a lot of those scenes. But yeah, Raiders, I mean, that set the stage.
Right.
And did you know that was like 42 years ago?
Yeah. And I think one reason that this movie doesn't rank as high for me as the other two is if I tried, I mean, we'll see if time changes this at all for me too. When I think of what are some of the scenes in this movie that is going to, in my mind, be iconic of Indiana Jones. And a lot of them are callbacks to the other movies.
Okay, that's fair.
So that's one reason. But again, that'll have to take a little time and see if any of these really stick with me after a while.
Which, funny enough, I think that's why I like this one a lot, is because of the creative ways that they utilized all those callbacks to tell this story.
Right.
I will say, the tuk-tuk races.
That was pretty fun.
If there is not a tuk-tuk race ride at some theme park eventually, I'm going to be really disappointed.
Was that a unique thing for this movie, actually?
I mean, car chases and stuff like that. And I know they supposedly have like a sequence of, it usually shows up in some specific order, like motorcycle, horse, car, or something like that. I don't know. I can't remember what the sequence is, but yeah, some people have noticed there's like a sequence that the chases always happen in. And they even had like the little map, that shows where they're heading in true Indiana Jones fashion. Yep. It's a good movie, you guys. It's so fun. Yeah. And I don't know. I think I liked it a little more than Tristan did, but
I'm not bashing it at all. I can't think of much to really complain about. Like I said, nostalgia is probably a big factor for me too.
Yeah, I feel like this just reignited my nostalgia because of all the callbacks. So maybe that's why I liked it so much.
Yeah, and like we talked about, they did a good job with those.
They redeemed themselves from the Crystal Skull.
Oh my.
So
I'm glad they did one more because that was a depressing one to go out on.
Yes.
I thought that was going to be the last one.
I think there was a possibility that it was going to be the last one. And I think maybe they realized it was such a bomb and they decided they needed to do better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would recommend it. Out of 5 stars, how many stars would you give this one?
Oh, I don't know. 4.5 maybe?
I would give it 4.5. Yeah. So, and that's out of entertainment value, not archaeology value.
Right.
Remember, this is not...
Well, compared to the other ones, it's probably the best archaeology value too.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually.
So go see it and let us know what you think of it.
Yep. We're back with our regular episode, reading the next section of In Small Things Forgotten next month. So we'll see you then.
Bye, guys.
Archaeology Books for Fun is brought to you by the Florida Public Archaeology Network, a program of the University of West Florida. You can find out more about archaeology and about FPAN at fpan.us. We appreciate any feedback, so if you're listening to us as a podcast, please leave us a review, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thanks for listening.